The morning sun was just beginning to warm the desert highway when Big Jack Matthews rolled into Silver Creek on his Harley. Behind him came the rest of the Iron Brotherhood, 12 men whose leather vests and rumbling engines had a way of clearing streets wherever they went. But Jack wasn't thinking about that. He was thinking about breakfast and maybe some of that famous apple pie he'd heard about at Ruby's diner. Ruby's sat on the edge of town like it had been there forever. Red vinyl booths lined the windows and a long chrome counter ran down the middle. The smell of coffee and bacon hung in the air like a warm blanket. When the Brotherhood walked through that door, their boots heavy on the checkered floor, every conversation stopped. Forks paused halfway to mouths. Coffee cups froze in midair. Jack was used to it. 58 years old, with arms covered in ink and a beard that reached his chest, he knew what people saw when they looked at him. But he also knew what they didn't see. The 20 years he'd spent as a nurse before his wife passed. The way he'd raised his daughter alone after that. The teddy bear he kept in his saddlebag for any scared kid he might meet on the road. The waitress came over with menus tucked under her arm. She was young, maybe 25, with auburn hair pulled back in a ponytail and green eyes that reminded Jack of spring leaves. Her name tag said Natasha. "Good morning, gentlemen," she said, and her voice was steady even though Jack could see her hands trembling just a little. "What can I get you to drink?" "Coffee all around, sweetheart," Jack said gently. "And take your time with those menus. We're in no hurry." As she turned to get their coffee, Jack noticed it. A purple shadow along her jawline, poorly covered with makeup. When she reached for the coffee pot, her sleeve rode up, revealing finger-shaped bruises circling her wrist like a dark bracelet. Jack's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Not yet. The Brotherhood ordered their breakfast and Natasha moved between tables with practiced efficiency. She smiled at customers and refilled cups, but Jack watched her flinch every time the door opened. Watched her eyes dart toward the window like a deer checking for wolves. When she brought their plates, Jack caught her gently by the hand. His touch was soft as a whisper. "Miss," he said quietly, "I couldn't help but notice you look like you might have taken a fall or something. You doing okay?" Natasha's face went pale, then flushed red. She pulled her hand back, tucking it against her apron. "I'm fine," she said quickly. "Just clumsy. I walked into a door." Jack had heard that one before. Too many times. "Doors don't leave fingerprints, darling," he said even more gently. "And I've been a nurse long enough to know the difference between an accident and something else." Her eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them back fast. "Please," she whispered. "I can't. I need this job. My manager, he'll be here soon, and if he sees me talking to you." "Your manager did this?" one of Jack's brothers asked, his voice low and dangerous. Natasha didn't answer, but her silence said everything. "What's his name?" Jack asked. "Rick Morrison," she breathed. "Please, you have to understand. He's the owner's son. Nobody stands up to the Morrisons in this town. They own half of Silver Creek. The sheriff is his uncle. I tried to report it once and it just got worse. I'm saving money to leave, but it takes time and I have nowhere else to go." Jack sat back and looked at his brothers. 40 years they'd been riding together. 40 years of looking out for people who couldn't look out for themselves. They'd raised money for children's hospitals, escorted abuse victims to safe houses, stood between bullies and their victims more times than he could count. "When does Rick usually show up?" Jack asked. "Around 9," Natasha whispered, "to count the morning receipts." Jack checked his watch. 7:30. "Okay then," he said. "We'll just be enjoying our breakfast nice and slow. And when Rick gets here, well, we'll see what happens." "You don't understand," Natasha said, tears spilling over now. "He's cruel. He'll make this worse for me. He always does." "Sweetheart," Jack said, and his voice was as gentle as summer rain, "nobody's going to hurt you again. Not on my watch. You just go about your work and let us handle this." The next hour and a half crawled by like molasses. The Brotherhood ordered more coffee, more pie, more toast. They spread out, taking up the counter and 3 booths, making themselves comfortable. Other customers came and went, shooting nervous glances at the big men in leather, but nobody said a word. At 8:55 a red pickup truck pulled up outside. A man climbed out, tall and rangy with slicked back hair and mirror sunglasses. He had the swagger of someone who'd never been told no in his life. "That's him," Natasha breathed, and Jack saw pure fear flash across her face. Rick Morrison pushed through the door, already talking loud. "Natasha, where's my morning count? And why the hell are there bikes out front? You know I don't like that element in my. He stopped mid-sentence when he saw the Brotherhood. All 13 of them watching him with eyes that had seen too much of the world's ugliness. Can I help you boys? Rick said, trying to sound tough, but Jack heard the waver in his voice. Jack stood up slow and easy. He was 6'4" and broad as a barn door. When he moved toward Rick, the younger man took an involuntary step back. We were just having breakfast, Jack said conversationally. Your waitress here, she's been wonderful. Real professional. Must be hard though working with these kinds of injuries. He gestured toward Natasha and Rick's face went dark red. That's none of your business, he snapped. Natasha, get in the back. Now. I don't think so, Jack said, and his voice had gone cold as January wind. See, I think Natasha's going to stay right here where we can see her. And I think you and I are going to have a conversation about how men are supposed to treat people. You don't know who you're messing with, Rick blustered. My family owns this town. And my family, Jack said, gesturing to the Brotherhood, rides 12,000 miles a year helping people who need it. We've worked with women's shelters in 43 states. We know lawyers, judges, and enough good cops to fill a phone book. So here's what's going to happen. He stepped closer and Rick backed up against a table. You're going to give Natasha her final paycheck with 2 months severance. You're going to write her a letter of recommendation so good it could get her hired anywhere. And you're never going to come near her again. Not to talk, not to text, not to drive past her house. Nothing. And if I don't? Rick tried to sound defiant, but his voice cracked. Then we make some phone calls, Jack said softly. And we let people know what kind of man you really are. We're pretty good with social media for a bunch of old bikers. Pictures tend to go viral. Reputations tend to crumble. Family businesses tend to suffer. You following me, son? Rick looked around the diner. Every customer was watching now. Old Mrs. Chen from the post office. Bob Warner from the hardware store. People he'd known his whole life. People who'd seen him swagger and bully his way through Silver Creek for years. And in their eyes he saw something that made his blood run cold. They believed the bikers. They were on Natasha's side. Fine, he muttered. Fine. Just get out of my restaurant. Our pleasure, Jack said. Soon as you write that check. And that letter. 10 minutes later, Natasha stood outside Ruby's diner holding an envelope and crying. But these were different tears. I can't believe you did that, she said. Nobody's ever stood up for me before. Not like that. Everyone deserves someone in their corner, Jack said. Now you've got a decision to make. You can stay in Silver Creek or you can ride with us to Flagstaff. We know a woman who runs a cafe there. Good woman. She's always looking for reliable help and she pays fair. You'd have a fresh start. Natasha looked back at the diner, then at the Brotherhood. These rough-looking men with their scars and tattoos who'd shown her more kindness in 2 hours than she'd known in 2 years. I'll need to pack, she said. We'll wait, Jack told her. Take your time. 3 months later, Jack got a letter forwarded from Flagstaff. Inside was a photo of Natasha standing in front of a cafe wearing a clean apron and a genuine smile. The bruises were gone. The fear in her eyes had been replaced with something that looked like hope. The letter said simply, "Thank you for seeing me when I'd become invisible. Thank you for reminding me that kindness still exists. I'm saving money and taking night classes. For the first time in years I can see a future. You changed my life." Jack pinned the photo to the bulletin board in his garage next to dozens of others. Faces of people the Brotherhood had helped over the years. Each one a reminder that sometimes the scariest looking people have the biggest hearts. That true strength isn't about how hard you can hit but about how you use your power to protect those who can't protect themselves. That evening as the sun set over the desert, Jack fired up his Harley. Tomorrow they'd ride again. There were always more roads to travel. More people who needed someone to stand up for them. More chances to prove that kindness and love aren't weaknesses but the strongest forces in the world. He thought about Natasha and her new beginning. About Rick Morrison, who he'd heard had quietly left Silver Creek after the incident. About all the small ways one moment of courage could ripple outward, changing lives in ways you might never fully know. Big Jack Matthews smiled beneath his beard, kicked his bike into gear and rode off into the golden light, knowing that sometimes the best thing a person can do is simply notice when someone's hurting and choose to care. Because at the end of the day, beneath all the leather and chrome and rumbling engines, that's what the Brotherhood was really about. Not the bikes or the freedom of the open road, though those things mattered. It was about family. About standing together. About being the kind of people who see injustice and refuse to look away. And in a world that could sometimes feel cold and cruel, that was everything.